Hello. So, I thought I would read a post that I made on Reddit because in the comments I was talking with someone about I think different places where you can discuss this online, and it seems to be a rare subject for the most part. But Reddit was one of the first places where I found a community of people who are talking about exactly this. And after reading a bit, I posted up a post basically talking about my experience at the time. And it was a mid-process of the deepening of this initial realization or recognition, and it was talking about one of the more intense and difficult parts of the awakening. So I'll go ahead and read this one, albeit the writing is extremely tiny on this phone. But so the post goes like this: I thought I would share some of my experience of what is known as the dark night of the soul, of how deepening insight brought me through it. So I've talked about this before on the channel, the dark night thing, the fear and the mourning type thing that can happen as we kind of let go of what we know, or what we've known, or what we're used to. So back to this. So recently I had the second and most profound shift in my perception of my life as a result of continued and unrelenting practice of emptiness in daily life. This insight allowed me to see through the illusion of separation and the egoic self for quote-unquote real, and not as a mental concept. So that's talking about, but what I meant by unrelenting is at that point this had become, like I mentioned in previous videos, like a hobby, something I was really into. So this resting in this kind of empty space of presence was something that's all I wanted to do, and I was kind of obsessed with it. At any given chance, I would sit in presence and just let the presence become more profound, more exaggerated, more peaceful, more still. And it wasn't something I was doing as a dedicated practice with designated time periods. It was just all the time. So back to this again. The shift was so drastic, obvious and normal. It literally felt like waking up. I was able to really observe myself for the first time ever. A deep insight into non-duality. This came with the thinning of my mind and thought forms to the point of transparency. The mind and the ego still functioned as normal, but I could watch it, and with attention it started to change its habits. I had a deep sense of knowing that everything was okay, which replaced my usual worry and anxiety. I know it's hard to describe, but from reading other people's posts, I know that what I'm pointing to will be understood on some level. So what I meant by I could watch it was, like I explained before, and a stepping back, a kind of objectification of the thoughts, but also the deeper insight there was realizing that what is the subject of the thoughts, what the thoughts refer to, the thinker, that which is interpreting the thoughts, that which is not aware of the thoughts, but that which recognizes, in a way, the thoughts and responds to them. The thinker was also a thought, although at this point in time I didn't word it that way. The ego, still functioning as normal, describes the momentum that continues, and the realization that there's no control over that. It just happens on its own. There's no thinker that's in control of the thoughts, that's making the thoughts that the thoughts refer to. A big part of that stepping back and expanding, relaxing, is just allowing that to be and seeing it for what it is. Back to the post. I was on a kind of spiritual high for a while, resting in presence and it deepening. Whilst deconstructing the layers of the self, I eventually noticed that the deeper forms of attachment, that of relationships in the physical body, were recurring in different forms of thought and emotion, and seemed to be releasing accumulated energy into the body and mind, which was deeply painful. So the deepening of the presence is, that I would describe there, it deepens more when it's known, not thought about, that all there is presence, and that there's no self being present. All there is beingness or presence itself. And the deeper forms of attachment I mentioned popped up in the mind in different forms, but I noticed they were all linked together by a kind of undertow of emotion that didn't really have a context of its own. Again, that was just happening on its own, but seemed to be coming up and forming into different thought forms, if that makes any sense. So back to this. I can describe it like the mourning for the death of the self and all who I cared about in life. The clarity of my insight was so that I knew I couldn't go back to the level of identification that was experienced before. The space had opened up to the extent that I knew I didn't have any control over this happening. I felt like a little part of my reality died every time thought forms came and went like waves. So this identification, the thoughts that were once identified with and seemed so real, came up as a pattern, and every time they came up, they were seen through, they were seen to be unreal, seen to be fictions. And every time that happened, in waves, that pain, that fear, that sadness seemed to be released. I was confronted with it. I became it completely. It's very hard to describe this part. It's like every time part of this life that I was so attached to was it came up and in the moment was exposed to be ultimately not real, ultimately knew had to be let go of. There was a pain that came along with that was profound. Letting go of it, or knowing that it had to be let go of and there was no other alternative. And this is the point where I knew that I had the thoughts of what have I done? I want to go back. I undo this. The mind says this is too much. I've broken reality. I've broken my reality. I've destroyed my life. How can I go back? This is horrendous. I don't want this. Yeah, intense. So, back to the post. I'd been filming a video journal of my experiences, and it said something like, when I'm describing my experience, I'm speaking from the point of view of the self. Since the self is the manifestation of consciousness, it's like the eternal is talking itself through the process of awakening, through the person. So it's this strange sense of love that came from me trying to describe this to myself. It was like ultimate reality that I am trying to comfort itself through the medium that this finite entity is most familiar with, and it was an immense sense of compassion and empathy there. I think that's the best way I can describe that. Next part. After I said this, I got an enormous sense of comfort and peace. I was able to clearly see the loop I was stuck in. It was just a pattern that was so deeply rooted in my being. To see through it felt like the whole universe was dying. From the point of view of the self, I realised that the self and the mind-body unit could not conceive of the reality of non-duality, and when faced with it, it did not know how to react other than its animalistic fight or flight response. I'll just go straight into the next bit. I finally saw the self as a scared, cornered animal trying to protect itself from threat. How beautiful, simple and necessary its efforts were at keeping my body and mind safe. The emotions I was feeling were gratitude and adoration. So it's not seeing the ego, not seeing this illusory identity of self as an enemy, seeing it for what it is, seeing that all it's trying to do is defend itself, all it's trying to do is not die and disappear into oblivion. And these visceral responses were just an animalistic reaction to threat. And at that point, the whole pattern, the whole function of that was seen clearly. And there was no battle between, there's no other self battling the self. There was just integration there. There was love there. There was acceptance there. I wasn't fighting these negative emotions. I wasn't fighting the identification. I wasn't fighting the fear response of the mind. I was just loving it as much as I could. And in that, something dropped. Something just changed in the emotion body, you could say. It was like a radical acceptance of all the negative aspects of the mind and the ego as just expressions of the infinite. Just a process that's automatic, that's happening, not like a nefarious entity hiding in the unseen, trying to fuck your life up, if that makes any sense. I finally saw, so next part. These patterns had to be seen in full, and the solidity of the individual reality had to become transparent enough to see clearly. After the initial shift in perspective, there was something in the background telling me not to go deep. It turned out to be the echoes of deeply rooted attachments in the mind-body. So there was that sense of don't go too far. There was that pull back, that follow this away from this. follow this thought stream away from this, because this is your end. This is death. Just don't go there. Come back. Listen to me. Let's talk about this type thing. That function, that pull back from, rather than complete immersion in this experience without the experiencer holding back from it, picking and choosing what's acceptable and what's not. So then I said, if there's anyone else out there going through their own dark night, hopefully this helps. Stay empty, go deeper, look, expand in presence. It'll pass and the pain will subside, because it always does. Now I feel like I have a state of integration, balance, normality and profound peace. The functions of the self have changed somewhat, but the attachments are still there. But I can appreciate them now for what they are. Need has been replaced with love and clarity. Life is awesome. So that's basically describing that when this is seen through, something shifts, something happens, like something clearly happened. A perspective shift, a radical perspective shift, but it continues. The momentum of the mind, the momentum of these emotions continues. It's not like the flick of a switch and that's it. It's recognition of, let's see, some identity beyond the self that's limitless. But because it's limitless, you can't really call it an identity. After that, it continues to come in waves. It continued to come in waves for me in different situations in life and so on. And every time that the accumulations in the emotion are released or are expressed or are accepted, it kind of has like a healing effect. But my point is that it continues, that process that I described there with that intense moment just continues. So that the attachment is, that function is still there, but it didn't function, or it couldn't function to the same extent as before, because I had let go of the illusion, the belief, the strong belief in that as a reality, as the fundamental reality, and accepted presence as myself, in a sense, as the fundamental reality, undeniable. After that, the thoughts about it, the doubt thoughts about it that continued to come up, didn't have a hold. They couldn't be fully believed anymore, if that makes any sense. So anyway, I just wanted to read that. That'll do for now. Any similar experiences I'd like to hear, so you can leave in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time. Also, I forgot to mention that even though I did find that the experience on Reddit connecting with people was very positive for me, a word of caution that there is a lot of mind delusion playing out on there. So for example, there are people arguing with each other about non-duality, and so, you know, oneness arguing with oneness about itself, trying to define itself. You can kind of see how oxymoronic that is, but at the same time it can be a very useful insight into the nature of mind and the nature of identification and thought, if you know what to look for. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that for anyone who's maybe interested in going on there. Just don't get involved in the defining things or identification with one viewer or another.